despite having gone to university and having become an adult and having to quote unquote live life and not having as much time anymore to like be an activist full time. But because of why I do it, which is sort of like for my personal health and for the health of people who are like me, it's easy for me to keep going, and it creates that sort of shield against whatever negative comments that I could possibly get, if that makes sense.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam, and on this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and how they became the person they are today. One of the coolest things about this generation is that we care a lot about inspiring people. We're not doing things for ourselves, we're doing things so that we inspire someone, we make their day better, we try to do everything that we can to make sure that they have everything they need to be successful. And while it's great to talk about all the amazing things that a person has done or the amazing things that people have done, it's also important to talk about the obstacles, the difficult things that they had to overcome, because that's part of life. Yes, everyone has done amazing things in their life, but those successes could not have happened without failures, without obstacles along the way, without the negativity. And so it's really important to showcase the positive and the negative, because that's what human beings face. Positive experiences, negative experiences, which combine into the person that they are today. Because these experiences and stories are what make people human beings. And I hope that you continue to be inspired by the stories of all these amazing people on this podcast, and hopefully you can create something special, whatever that may be. Now, my guest this week is Joshua Gabriel, who is a climate change activist from Nigeria. And in 2019, he co-founded LEARNBLUE, a global nonprofit organization working to build a generation of activists and innovators. With his work, he has been recognized as 100 most influential young leaders in Nigeria. This happened in 2019. And in 2021, he was honored in Teen Vogue's 21 Under 21 Young People Shaping Tomorrow. He's a very passionate climate change activist who wants to continue to raise the issue of climate change, and especially in Africa. I'm really excited to learn more about his story and excited to talk with him. So Joshua Gabriel, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me, Hamza. I'm really hopeful that you can hear me clearly, because I am having a bit of a network issue. But hi, I'm Joshua Gabriel Oluwaseyi. I am, like you said, a climate activist, a climate change activist from Nigeria. And the work that we do, or that I do generally, is centered around inspiring young people like myself, Gen Zers, on how we can take action in our everyday lives to be more carbon neutral, to help the environment. And I'm really excited to be on the podcast with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And don't worry about the network issue. I mean, I know sometimes the internet can be the most evilest of things when it comes to connectivity, but one of the things that I really want to talk about first is finding your why in a passion with your passion project. And it's funny because I've had this discussion with many of my guests, but I don't know. I want to go more in depth with this particular episode. So I don't want to. I want to let you answer or focus on this issue more in detail. But tell me a bit about why finding your passion or finding your why behind the passion is so important. Because, and maybe I'm going to answer this. I will answer this question for you. But like to me, I feel like finding your why, I guess, is almost like your shield. It protects you from, I guess, from all the like all the distractions, like whether it's like people telling you that your idea is crazy or stupid or not helpful, whether it's I don't know. I guess that just I'm gonna use that example because I know that's a common example, but I feel like when you find your why, it really protects you and allows you to keep going. So I want to know, like, from your perspective, why is finding your why so important? Or do you feel like it's the same reason that I gave, which is that it almost protects you? It's your shield from, I guess, outside forces.
I hope you can hear me now. I've had to switch my internet like three times. I do hate when this happens, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Sort of like your why. I think that's a great way to put it. It's sort of like a shield, yeah. I've never called it that, but it's sort of this. I'll call it a string, if you will, like a tether, that sort of ties you to your the reason why you're doing what you're doing. The reason why you're an activist, the reason why you're an entrepreneur, the reason why you're a change maker, you're a scientist, whatever. Your why is such an integral part of ensuring that you're able to keep going when you've got like quote unquote trying times. An example of that for me would be I when I started my journey as an activist, I had a lot, and I mean a lot of, naysayers, and it's not just because they wanted to be naysayers. It's just sort of ignorance. I mean, I live in Africa, I live in Nigeria, and you're not expected to be a climate activist as a Nigerian teenager. Like as an 18-year-old, you're expected to, do every other thing. You're expected to be a student or like, having fun. And then there was me who wanted to like solve climate change, to be exaggerated. And the reason why I wanted to do that or why I decided to do that wasn't because I wanted to be the savior or hero, but more because um, I learned about my allergies to air pollutants in 2019, or 2018 rather. And basically, what this meant for me was I was shocked that I could be allergic to air pollution, not because I'm special, but because I'm a black person in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, allergies are not treated like, you know, a thing. I know when I watch American movies, I sort of like see who have allergies, not allergies, and all that, and it's deadly. But in Nigeria, you don't think of allergies as like deadly things. You think of it as like a thing that rich people sort of have. So as part of my why, I sort of Googled, what are the impacts of allergies, but also what causes them. For me, my allergic reaction was to air pollutants like, smoke and dust and aerosols and all of that stuff. And I learned surprisingly that at least 100,000 people had died in the year 2017 from air pollution related causes in my city and my country at large. And so that was sort of like a eye-opening moment of like, oh my god, wow, this is insane. People are dying. And so that has been my why. I do this, I began my activism as off of the research, if you will, of people are dying from this. I could die from this because I'm allergic to dust. And so I need to do something about it, right? And so that has been what has grounded me. That has been what has tethered me to like the work that I do over the last couple of years, despite having gone to university and having become an adult and having to quote unquote live life and not having as much time anymore to like be an activist full time. But because of why I do it, which is sort of like for my personal health and for the health of people who are like me, it's easy for me to keep going, and it creates that sort of shield against whatever negative comments that I could possibly get, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think it's so important to be able to have a really strong why, because I think the stronger the why, the more committed you are. And I know some people might think, well, Hamza, what does strong mean? And it really depends, I guess, I guess from person to person. But it really goes down to, I see something that needs to be fixed or that people aren't talking about, and I want to go do as much as I can, because obviously, like you said, like it's hard because there's so many things going on in people's personal life.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important to be like, I want to do this because I think this is really important. And sure, and I think you probably know this better than anyone else, or especially any activist will tell you, they don't know everything about the issue that they're advocating for, but they're willing to learn and be more invested. And because you are so interested in learning and figuring out how you want to tackle what some sort of issue is, your why is very, very strong. Now, if you're doing it because it's like, well, other people are doing it, or because you see, I guess, what people are saying about this particular person, if you're chasing something else, then your why is not really strong. And I want to ask you a follow-up question, which is, I think there are a lot of people that, or not a lot of people, there are some people that will determine the credibility of a person based on like whether they've been seen in headlines and articles and awards, and you've obviously had done that. But what I love about you was you were like, no, that's not what's important. What's important is your why. I've talked about this with other guests, but more in a broad sense. So I want to pose this question to you again, which is, I think there are a lot of activists or there are many activists around the world trying to create change, but sometimes we don't know if we can take a person seriously unless we see them on the news or
Mhm.
if they have like a lot of like recognition and stuff. And so to people, there are some people will um judge, some people will be like, oh, I want to be an activist so I get recognized, instead of focusing on why they are an activist in the first place. So I want to ask you, if someone is chasing recognition instead of impact, why is that a bad thing? And I know that sounds like a stupid question, but you get what, like,
No, it's not.
but like sometimes people do chase that.
Yeah, and it's not a stupid question actually. It's like, although it does sound like one of those questions where like you're on the BBC and they're looking for like sound bites, and it's like, he said that. Joshua said it's bad to chase our words, and it's like I didn't say that. But no, it's a very tricky slope because there are people who I don't think. Okay, actually, people, I do know people who do this, so I guess if I said otherwise, I'm lying. But I guess my point is, most of my friends, at least, did not become activists because they wanted recognition. But also, one thing that is not bad, I think the philosophy that I tend to live by is that we need as many hands as possible, right? So if you want to become an activist because you want, to be on Forbes, or you want to be on Teen Vogue, or you want, I don't know, to be on the media, that's all right, actually. It's not bad. As long as you're willing to do the work, as long as you're able to call the attention to the issues that you're advocating for, as long as you're willing to learn, right? That's absolutely okay. If anything, sometimes that can actually even be better because more often than not, people like myself who are grassroots sort of activists who do things on a very down low style, we do so much work, we make so much impact on the ground level, but oftentimes that doesn't get amplified in the media. And so you have people who do stuff on the surface level who get the media attention. They know the right things to say and they know what buttons to push to get that sort of accolades and press and awards and whatnot. And I think yes, we do need more sort of, we do wish that people who do these things for genuine reason get more of that recognition because it does give us a level of confidence to say, hey, what we're doing is actually making change. But I think it's also not a it's like one of those gray areas, but it's not a bad thing. It's not like a bad moral compass to want to do this because you want to be recognized. Because the work of an activist is really, really hard. Like we make it seem easy. We're just like on social media, we're like very, very chatty, we're excited and we're campaigning, we're passionate. But it's very, very mentally draining because you get to lose a lot of friends, you get to lose acquaintances because most people don't agree with you, especially for climate activism, because people think it's a hoax. So people are like, oh, this is a lie, or this is a scam, or you're just doing this to make money. So being able to, if you're somebody who has the resources and the means to, get access to say media and awards, and you want to be an activist solely so you can get these people to notice you, by all means go for it. That's just my opinion, at least. I know people who are like, no, that's bad and you shouldn't do that, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think intrinsically it helps the sort of goal. It's only when you become a, pardon the use of this word, but I'm sure most of our listeners are Gen Zers anyway, become a sellout, that's when it's a problem, right? When you go from, fighting for climate change or better still, advocating for better policies to supporting Shell or like the biggest polluters and becoming their ambassadors, or suddenly saying fast fashion is good and it's not so bad, and trying to subtly begin to shift blame from like the polluters to like individuals, that's when it becomes a problem, right? But as long as you're for the climate, as long as you're for the people, it doesn't matter if you're doing it for reasons like I want to make money or I want to be a speaker or I want to travel the world, because climate activists get to travel a lot. If whatever your reason is, as long as you're doing it for with an intrinsic knowledge of what the climate movement needs and what it is and how you can contribute to that, I think it's absolutely okay. And I felt like I just talked a lot there, but I'm sure, or I hope, that you got something out of the many, many things that I said.
For sure. And here's the thing. I don't blame you, because that is a really difficult question. And again, it really goes down to a person's intention. Um,
Mhm.
and I think you are right in the sense that it's okay to um it's okay to be, I don't want to say chasing, but let's just use that word because I can't think of anything, to go after media and recognition, because I mean, yeah, it does require a lot of work. But I think it's very important to not be arrogant, to be like, oh,
Mhm.
once I'm in this particular position, now I'm
Like,
unstoppable. You know what I'm saying? Like that is a bad thing. But if you're saying like, okay, I'm being recognized as, but knowing that there's still more work to be done, it's better to be continuously a student, always learning. And it's difficult because there are so many, like, it's like people don't always, people don't know everyone, or people don't know a specific person. And so that's why it's like, people will go, oh, well, we never heard of this person, so why should we trust them? And it's like, well, you don't know what it's like to be them. Same way, like my intention with
mhm.
podcasting is like, I want to know what it's like to be Joshua. I don't care how many recognition or awards he's doing, or his recognition or awards. I mean, it's helpful, but I want to know more about your personal story, your journey. What is your why? And it's sad because we live in a world where we do chase recognition, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but don't make recognition the sort of like, oh, I've come to the conclusion that this person is more credible than this person. I feel like Joshua, and maybe this, and
Yeah,
as someone who's an activist, I think as Gen Zers, what we want to do is we need to go, it's me and you versus a particular problem, rather than me versus Joshua, if that
yes.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm just burning with excitement and passion as you're talking about that because um, you know, I am an activist and okay, it might seem like I've got a lot of recognition, but I promise you I don't. I do not. It's like I don't even know how these things happen. For the most part, I never like seek these things out. It's just, oh hi Joshua, we found your work. And we're like, we want to recognize you. I'm like, oh great. But that my I think my philosophy really is that if you're in a position to access media, for example, you should use that access to elevate other people around you. At least that's how I try to live. Like if I'm on Teen Vogue, for example, I want to be able to nominate the next person who's going to be on Teen Vogue or in Forbes, stuff like that. And I also think that just like you said, being a learner the whole time, there are a lot of people who uh consciously or unconsciously just sort of like get into this space and become climate activists, and then they become like the face of the face of the movement, again, either consciously or subconsciously. And I think because the work we do is so overwhelming, most people do not even know that it's happening, but they get put on this pedestal of like, this is what it is to be like an activist, and so everybody else must follow me, which sort of ties into your next point on like, it should be me and you against, say, Shell or fossil fuel companies or the government, and not me versus you. And I think that's something that Gen Zers are generally very good at. We don't get not enough credit for this, but Gen Zers, I was doing research about this like years ago for LEARNBLUE, when we're sort of trying to figure out what our targeted audience would be and how we're going to approach our missions. But Gen Z, we call ourselves the plurals. Research calls us the plurals, I guess. But what that basically means is, we seldom, and I'm doing this subconsciously too, but you find it hard to speak to a Gen Zer, especially one like an activist who says I in conversations. It's generally a we thing. Like it just happens. It's not like, oh my God, I am doing this, or I am changing the world, or I am, which is all good. But oftentimes you hear people say we, like we did this, we did that, we are going to have a match, we're going to lobby, we're going to, run for government, we're going to vote, and we. So there is this sort of sense of plurality amongst Gen Zers that I think we don't get enough credit for. So yes, there are people amongst Gen Zers who are very much like intoxicated, I guess, by the fame and the awards and all of that stuff, and they begin to see themselves as an extension of the movement instead of a part of the movement. But I think in a more wide sense, there are more Gen Zers who are more for, what is it that we can do. And I think that's why the Fridays for Future movement is so major, right? That's why it's so widespread. It's because Greta started campaigns in front of Parliament, and she was able to inspire people. And because we are the generation of we, it became very easy to like spark that catalyzing or catalyst sort of reaction where everybody just said, you know what, I can resonate with what Greta is saying, so I'm going to do mine too, and I'm going to do mine too, I'm going to do mine too, and then you have 100 million people marching, around the world on a particular day. So yeah, no. it's a very intricate sort of conversation to walk, where you don't want to be, or I don't want to sound, awfully ignorant of like people's experiences. It's even those who are supposedly doing this for the press or the media or the attention. But I think also it's important to recognize that there are people like that, and them doing that is not necessarily a bad thing. It can just be a way to further the movement. With whatever resources they have, it's sort of leveraging privilege, if you will, right? Because myself as a Black person in Africa specifically, I know how hard it is to get the media to feature a story about me. I've reached out to media companies like, hey, I've got this project I'm working on, and I think it'll be interesting to talk about. And it's like I'm aired, I'm left on red. But I do know people abroad who I would literally be like, hey, reach out to BBC or CNN or ABC or MSNBC, whatever, and ask them for like a feature. And voila, they're on TV like a week later. So sometimes it's not as bad a thing. I guess that's my point. It's not as bad as it may seem that these people are just what do you call them, fame mongers or media mongers. Yeah, that was lengthy, but yeah.
I want to add to that. I think like sort of it's okay to be part of, it's okay to get recognized as long as you have this like, yeah, okay, it's great that you want to talk to me, but you see what's going around here. We need to talk about this. And I don't want to look at the me versus like the reason why it's so important to look at it from a me and you versus another issue, or versus an issue compared to me versus you, is it goes back to arrogance, in the sense it's like it's now all about me, or it's all about you, and then not realizing that you are not really helping the people that you are claiming to be helping. Like if we're climate change activists, it can't be like, oh, I'm a better climate change activist, and you can't be like, well, I'm a better one because I do this. Because there are people around parts of the world, or maybe in the area that you grew up in, that's like, guys, we're suffering. Or wait, I thought you said you're advocating for an issue, but it looks like you're only advocating for yourself, and now you become part of the problem. So it is really important to just look at it from a we perspective and not me. That's actually, I think, the motto of my high school, or one of the things it says. It's like it's we, not me. And when you look at it, it's like we're all in this fight together. It's not just one person has to play the hero at the end of the day. So I think that's a really important thing.
I think just sort of like, I don't know what the next question is going to be, but just to like, again, sort of round that off, I think going back to your first question on like why and we, it, it ties back to like your ability to like tell stories, right? Because like people, Gen Z are also, a fun fact about Gen Zers, but also the biggest volunteer generation. So we love volunteering, like we're obsessed with it. It's like, I want to do something good. We have this intrinsic nature of wanting to do something good. Perhaps it's for the gram, perhaps it's for a TikTok video. It doesn't matter. We want to do something good. And so, being able to get people to do that generally comes back to you being able to communicate why you want them to do that and why you want to do that. So, for example, again, I have got allergies. When I'm speaking at conferences, when I'm speaking at podcasts, when I'm speaking at webinars, whatever, I often tell my story. It's redundant at this point because I've told it so many times. But every single time I tell that story, it's tailored to the audience I'm talking to. And I've seen firsthand people who have listened to me, go on to found their own nonprofit organizations and are doing amazing stuff. People who have gone on to go to good universities and lead research for like, clearing the oceans. I'm like, oh my God, you're so awesome. But I guess, it boils back down to, if you know why you're doing something, it doesn't only create a shield, but it creates like a ripple effect. It makes it easier for you to connect with people emotionally, because there's always a story to be told, as opposed to, climate change is bad. The world is going to get very hot and we're all going to die, which is pretty much true. But as opposed to that, it's harder to get people to feel like it concerns them that way. But when you're talking about, oh, I've got an allergy, and you probably have a friend who has also got asthma or something, you can see why it's important that we do something about this. Because what if it was you? Or what if it was your brother? Or what if it was that person you knew personally? The whole movement just sort of moves forward and moves better if it's we versus them, versus as opposed to me versus you. That felt very deep. But yeah.
Yeah, we could definitely go on and on about this, because I think it's so important to just focus on just remembering why you did something. But I want to transition to a little bit more into you. aside from the why aspect. But you talked about how because of allergy to pollution fumes, that's kind of what I guess, and maybe you can allude more to this, but it kind of got you into this climate change activism. And I'm always curious to learn about a person's beginning, because there are certain things in life that can just shape you into the person you are today. And so, was climate change something that you always wanted to do, or was it because of your allergy to pollution fumes that it kind of just made you realize, like, you know what, I need to do this? Tell me about the beginning. Like, was climate change always something you wanted to do, or was it just because of that event?
Yeah, great question, Hamza. And great podcast so far. I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot more recently because, like, again, I've spoken about my story so many times, and every single time I do, I remember like little bits and bits of details of like what I didn't talk about the last time. And for climate change, I don't know if it's like I've always wanted to fight for climate change per se. That would sound insanely what's the word? I don't know if it's superficial, but it feels very exaggerated. That's not the case. I'm not Mother Teresa or Malala by any means. But I grew up like a regular teenager for the most part, but I had an obsession with agriculture. I learned about propagation, like propagation types or methods in junior high, I think at the age of like 13, 12. And that was like first year of like junior high. And I learned about like how you plant stuff, which we knew the basics, but I didn't really know much. So I got obsessed with like biology and like what the apex of a plant is and where flowers come out from. I'm like, okay. It just felt normal to me because I was a weird nerdy kid at the time. But I did plant a tree and a lot of flowers. Like this was me at 13. I planted a mango tree, which is now all growing up in my house. So whenever I eventually get that deal from Netflix and I have to do like a documentary of my life, I'm gonna be like, this tree, I planted it. And that is it now. I planted at 13. But I guess my beginnings sort of go back to that on just, having this insane curiosity with like how nature works and how plants grow and how I could break a branch from a particular kind of flower and put it on the floor and it's going to grow, or a yam, or, these things. But it wasn't really until after high school 2018, when I was on what you call it, I had like a break after my senior high graduation to get into university, and I attended this event called Teens General Assembly. It's like the UNGA, but way smaller and just for teenagers, like very 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 secluded, what do you call it, immersive experience. And I attended this on a scholarship as well. And I met people there who were like 17, 18, 19-year olds who were already amazing activists. You may know some of them. Miraba Mora, Kennedy Ekeze, these are people who are mostly Nigerians, activists, change makers, like that was the word they called them. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I want to be a change maker as well. Like, how do you do that? And they talked about their stories, and these are powerful storytellers. So they told us about how they started and how they're fighting for or against female genital mutilation, how they're fighting for education and prisons, and these very inspiring stories. And they were 18 and 17 and 19. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 17, I'm almost 18. Like, what the hell am I doing with my life? And so there was that sort of like, these guys are so awesome, and then there's me, and I was obsessed, and I wanted to be like them, and it wasn't until I sort of began looking for avenues in which I could make change, not necessarily climate change, just anything I could do to be like a change maker. I could teach people about the global goals. I could do educational related projects. I thought about a lot of things, but it wasn't until I had the incident of like, my allergies and like, my reactions, which were quite scary at the time. And then all of this research that I finally said, hey, I'm going to focus on climate change amongst the many global goals or climate action. So yeah, there's always been that underlying sort of interest in the environment and how things work. Because I was a very curious child, but it wasn't until I met people who were like me, if you will, like my tribe, if you will, but they were just more experienced and learned, even though they were my peers. And I was like, wow, if they can do that, well, I guess I can do that too. And that was sort of what started this whole cascading effect of what is now, LEARNBLUE, and obviously me as a climate activist in Nigeria.
Yeah, and I agree with you in the sense that, like, growing up, I was also a normal kid as well. Like, I was just like, I'm just gonna study I'm gonna grow up and study for a particular degree. So I study computer science. So I'm gonna go and code
That was
and all
just
that.
me.
And
And then I went to statistics.
and here's the thing, I do love coding, don't get me wrong, but also like these past couple of years I've developed an interest in reading books. Not that I hated reading, but it was more of like, oh, I got to read for this particular class. So when I spent time reading, like the books that really stand out to me are biographies and just learning about the stories of all these influential people and realizing that, wait a minute, they had obstacles that they had to overcome. I didn't know that, or what kind of obstacles they had to overcome. So in 2020, when the pandemic was going on, I heard about the idea of podcasting, and it took me a while before I figured out what I wanted to do. But I started this podcast in 2020 or in January, and I was like, I want to create a podcast where I talk to inspiring people, but more specifically, people my age. And I know there are people that would be like, well, why can't you talk to Bill Gates? And I'm like, because I'm like, why would Bill Gates want to talk to me? But
Like,
so instead of talking to him, it would be great, but instead of talking to him, why can't we just speak to people that are literally our generation, people that are our age? Because there are incredible people that are doing amazing things that it almost makes you look silly in the sense where you're like, look, I'm 17, 18, and I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, what is my purpose? I don't, what's going on? But then you're seeing people who are your age doing something. So it's like, I want to be able to associate with these people to because they think different, they inspire people in different ways, and then just get to know them about their personal story. So it's like, I guess I'm doing the one thing that I'm very curious about, but instead of doing it with like older generations, I'm going to do it with people who are my age, because it's like it's just because that it just like it's so easy to connect with one another because of the age.
I
So
agree. Yeah, and I think that's sort of what LEARNBLUE sort of had to go through. So I mentioned this sparsely earlier with sort of trying to decide. Okay, it's the reason why LEARNBLUE like it's literally ingrained into our mission. Like our goal or our mission is sort of to inspire Gen Z leaders or young leaders, but often specifically Gen Zers, on how they can take action to reduce their carbon footprint and obviously fight for gender equality and things like that. But the reason why it's that way is not because I just said, oh, Gen Zers are great. It was more to your point, I looked around me, right? And I thought, okay, I've got my elders. In Africa, I'm sure even in America, depending on your household, at least I know Asian American households have that, and in African household, you cannot talk to your elder anyhow. So you cannot expect me to go and tell my elder that their actions are like polluting the environment. Like, you're gonna get spanked. So I looked at like this option. I'm like, there is no way, there is there is no way that I would like realistically found a non-profit that's focused on like telling my elders that the reason why climate change is like really bad and all of that stuff. So I focused on Gen Zers because, like you said, we're so much. It's so much easier to relate to each other, and also you can sort of speak in their language. And I think it helped a lot that I worked as a social media manager for a while, like a consultant, so I knew how social media worked when I was more active on it. And so I knew that Gen Z spent a lot of time on social media before TikTok became a thing. And I knew if I needed to reach people like this, like just with a snap of a finger, I could make a tweet and there was a chance that that could go viral. So that sort of realization of, oh, it's my people that I can really talk to, not even people that are older than me, is why LEARNBLUE is the way it is. And I'm so happy that you sort of see it from that same lens of like, because you think, it would be lovely to speak to Bill Gates. It would be lovely to be able to tell my mom or my grandma or my aunts that, yeah. So let's not use this thing this time. Like too many nylons in the house is bad, or let's use recyclable, materials. It would be fun to do that, but it's like I don't want to get in trouble. So it's a lot more easy to talk to Gen Zers, especially those you don't necessarily have to see physically, just talking to them via a screen, and that way there's no sort of threat to your well-being, but you can still like feel like you're making impact and you're inspiring people across pretty much anywhere around the world that has access to like social media.
yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, which is, I guess, like the language, because Gen Zers, yes, we come from different backgrounds, different languages, but we resonate with the same thing. So, or we can resonate with an issue more so than with older generations. And that's not like
Mhm.
their fault or our fault. It's more because like maybe they haven't talked about it or they haven't experienced
Yeah.
it. And so it's understandable. And I know there are also Gen Zers who may not see it the same way, where it's like, I want to inspire someone. And then someone might go, like, why would you want to do that? So of course we have our own like I guess enemies, if we can say that. But still, I think
Yeah.
like the closer you are, because of the fact that we are the same generation, we can understand why someone cares about the thing, if that makes sense. Like I feel like there's an older parent that's gonna listen to this going like, what are they talking about? But like exactly. So it's like I guess what I'm trying to say, it's like we under like you may not like I don't understand climate change activism too much, but I can understand that you are really passionate about what you do. And it's just a sense it's just an also like, to put it bluntly, a really cool way to interact with people. So like why like let's interact with people my age or someone who's a few years older, younger than me, and just talk about how can we inspire each other to do better. So I think the closer you are in terms of age, it's just a great way to, I guess, hang out with people while also doing something beneficial. So I just feel like right now, like as I'm saying this, there's definitely a parent that's just like out here going, do not listen to Hamza and Joshua. What they're doing is wrong.
I mean, trust me. Like, trust me. If not for my why, I would have like given up like a long time ago. Because like for like 3 years, I'm pretty sure that till now, I've still got like family members who think I work for my nonprofit. They don't know that I own it. Like it's such a wild concept. To like it's like you own a podcast or you own a nonprofit. It's like you work for free. Like what make it make sense. So they think like I volunteer, which even that is still like foreign, but that's sort of acceptable. So trust me, I know there is a parent listening to their child listening to this like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. Go focus on your books. But yeah.
Yeah, and if I have a chance to, I guess, defend older generations, it's like it's not your fault, it's not our fault. It's just more about like motivations, because I'm sure like people have like whether it be your parents or other adults who have more experience than us. When they pursue things, they have their own personal motivation. And I can guarantee you this, Joshua, they're probably going through the same things that we go through, in the sense that where like they focus on their why, but then maybe their parents are like telling them that this is stupid. So it's like the
Yeah.
sense of like we I guess we can relate to them, but at the same time not relate to them. But it definitely goes down to like personal interest, motivation, and so I guess yeah, if that's probably my best way of defending parents or older generation.
It's okay.
But
I wasn't attacking anything. I was just sort of like reveling in like the intersection, but also this sort of bridging between us and them. It's not us versus them per se. It's just they are also like victims, if you will, of like this system or society as we know it and how it's structured and pollution. Like I mean, they like the older generation, like medicine was not as advanced as it is now, so they were dying from like things that could have been treated. So trust me, I'm not even attacking them. It's just that we've got this privilege, if you will, with technology that we can share our thoughts with you in, I think, Ohio or somewhere right now. And just like we're talking and it's like snap, snap. But like our parents or their parents, it wasn't that way for them. It was much more like I'm gonna like call you, I'm gonna walk to you, or it's just there's such a disparity. But I can agree on the fact that they also have their struggles that they had to deal with. They just perhaps didn't have the tools available like we do now to try to solve them so easily, right? If that makes sense.
for sure. I want to talk about your organization. You Learn Blue, a where you look to build a generation of activists and innovators. And I don't want to ask you like what led you to creating this organization, because I think you touched on it and I'm sure you've said in multiple interviews. But I'm really curious to know more about the name Learn Blue. Tell me a bit about how you came up with that. And it's funny because when I was getting to know more about you, as someone who's a climate change activist, sometimes like when I think of climate change, I think of the color green. And so I'm like, wait, is he the founder of Learn Green or Learn Blue? So tell me a bit about the backstory behind Learn Blue, like in terms of the naming.
You know, that's a great idea for a new name for like a new project. Learn Green. Okay, well, that actually might work. We have something in mind. Okay. Anyway, this is like a first or second because like this is not something I get asked a lot. I think it happens very rarely because people are often generally more focused on, my opinions on climate change or Nigeria and stuff like that. But no, LEARNBLUE is well, I worked over the last 5, 7 years. Wow, I'm old. Over the last couple of years, I've worked sort of in consulting as a brand consultant, as a brand consultant, um, and as social media consultant. And I have like this wealth of experience. So when LEARNBLUE was sort of being founded or coined, I think something I wanted to do was stand out. Like from the onset, I wanted you to see the name and think, what the hell? Like I needed a level of ambiguity that would have you wanting to find out more, right? It was like a conscious decision that, okay, we did a lot of. I worked in tech, so I also used to love to code. So you have no idea. I used to be a techie, and now I don't know. I just talk about climate change. But I was in tech, so like I did a lot of like schema. For those who are familiar with Jason, I did a lot of like schema and SEO stuff. So I wanted people to hear the name LEARNBLUE and immediately want to search what is LEARNBLUE. It was very conscious, and this was me at 20. So LEARNBLUE was sort of created out of this sense of I needed ambiguity. I needed a name that sounded easy enough, but also not easy in terms of what does LEARNBLUE have to do with climate? Like why? And I guess with that in mind, I'm just gonna try to break it down. We have this in our brand book, which I think is online. If you search for it, so that sort of explains the idea behind the name. But just for like a high level overview, learn is implied that LEARNBLUE's mission is to inspire people. We don't use the word learn a lot, but we use educate a lot. It's sort of one of our 4 pillars. Educate, activate, petition, and I think iterate. That's sort of like how we go. So our first goal in every mission, in every campaign, in every event is generally to educate people, either directly or indirectly, either by making a tweet that talks about the Amazon fire or by, organizing a physical workshop or stuff like that. So LEARNBLUE means learn, as in educate. Then blue was meant to blue was meant to connote sort of Gen Zers and our I want to say temperament. I think that's the way I'll put it. Temperament is the right word. If you've noticed as well, I'm not sure if the listeners want to hear all this, but you asked, so you're gonna get an answer. But the color blue in LEARNBLUE is sort of like purple. It's not blue, so that's another point of like what on earth is going on. But that was done on purpose as well because we're trying to get a color that spoke to what we, not just me, that's myself, my team, and like a bit of survey that I had on my internal sort of friend groups on like what color resonated with young people, Gen Zers more. And so we went for this sort of like purpley blue, like very light-ish neon. I don't know. It's a very interesting shade of blue. It is actually blue. It's not purple, but it's just at the very bleeding edge of like what could be purple. And towards that meant sort of just this calmness or this meekness that Gen Zers have, whilst also retaining a level of authority, like it's royal purple-ish, but also maintaining a level of authority when it comes to being an activist. Like we can be the most naughty, if you will, generation. We're on TikTok literally dancing like every 2 seconds. So we can be the most playful generation. We're very, very outgoing. We're very much the plurals. We're all for we. But with the flip of a switch, we can become activists. We can begin chanting Black Lives Matter. We can begin fighting for climate change. We can begin dragging our politicians and voting in new government. So that was sort of like the premise behind LEARNBLUE as a word, like educating, Gen Zers on climate change and gender equality and issues that we're passionate about. So educate and Gen Z, that's LEARNBLUE. I know it's a lot. But yeah, that's sort of the, again, high level overview of what it is. If you have the time to check over like the brand book, it's quite lengthy. It sort of breaks down everything from the logo to the colors to the meaning of every single one of those things that we taught out over the last couple years.
Here's the thing, if there's one thing that I really do like about your organization is that you have the intention to stand out. And whether you have an organization, business, podcast, whatever passion project that you're pursuing, it's really important to be able to figure out how to be different from other people. It's one thing, obviously, don't get me wrong, you want to be part of an issue, or you want to be part of the solution. So if it's climate change activism or inspiring people, that's always great. Like the more the better. But there's also the sense of, okay, well, what's different from this? And so sometimes even like the name can be interesting. And so that was really cool to for you to explain a bit about how Learn Blue, the name started, just because you want to be like, okay, wait, this is really interesting. I've never thought about this. I've never seen something like this. So I think that's really cool. Now, going into the
You're
actual, oh, go ahead.
just before you go, wait, I have to compliment you. Like, I don't even know if it's a compliment per se or just like a me being the brand strategist. I'm like thinking, oh my god, this is insane. The name of the podcast. It's very tied to your identity. I don't know if that's. I'm pretty sure it's conscious, but obviously just sort of looking at you and your name, it's very South Asian. I'm presuming you're South Asian by descent, by some. So when I saw Oh My Curry Goodness, I'm like, who is this person reaching out to me for a podcast called Oh My Curry Goodness? Like, it's such an unconventional name, right? And when I went to your Instagram, people you're interviewing are like mostly activists, so it's not curry, if you will. Like, it's not. You would think it's related to like food or something, but the more you think about it, the more it makes a lot of sense. Because when I think curry, I'm thinking South Asian delicacies. I literally am thinking Indian food, and I'm thinking similar stuff. So I guess in a way, I'm just sort of highlighting the fact that I see that, and it's an insane choice. I'm very bold on at that, and I don't know why you did that. Probably we'll talk about this some other time. But it's just a very very interesting name. It's fair enough, or it's not close enough to like Lembley in terms of the ambiguity of it all, and just having you questioning your life, like what am I saying, and what does it mean? But yeah.
Okay, well, because you brought that up, I'll be happy to talk about that. So when we hear stories that are interesting, we'll say, oh my goodness." Let's just put it out there, like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this thing happened." Now, curry, the thing about it is, it's like if people who know me know I really love curry, and I bring it up almost all the time. So I wanted to use curry as a way to, I guess, emphasize the "oh my goodness" part, because Joshua, like you talked about parents, if I don't want to put like a bad word in it, or like I don't want to put any, I want to put a word that, like, I guess is something I would say. So it's like it's really tied to who I am, because I'm not gonna put a
Oh, I
bad
get
word in it and then parents be like, "Oh, I can't believe this person is using this type of language." So curry is in a way, I guess, to like show emphasis to the goodness part. So it's like,
like
oh
oh
my.
my goodness, oh my curry goodness. Get it now.
So it's like, yeah, when I get to like when I talk to people, it's like it's understanding the emphasis and not like more about like, let's learn how to make curry. Like, I'm not gonna do that. It's more just to like to emphasize, and unless
Yeah.
you like, you actually have to like know who I am to understand that. And so that's what I would say. Like, if you know me, you would know I would say that. And then for other people, it's like, I guess, a way for me to replace a bad word with a more slightly interesting term. So that's kind of how it all
Yeah.
happened.
Wow. And here I was thinking it was more deep. Like I thought it had to do like South Asian descent. And oh my god, no. But no, that's an interesting backstory. Well, I wouldn't have thought. See, you guys need to do. This is a great name. Just leaves you wondering. I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen it as well and wondered what the curry is going on right now. Like instead of what the heck, it's like what the curry is this name. But yeah, just sort of moving on. You're gonna ask a question. You were asking something about Lemblu's name, and then you were gonna ask something else. And I'm sorry, so sorry I caught you short, but this is so exciting, and I love our conversation. So we
Yeah.
can just keep talking. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no. I thank you for answer or thank you for asking that question. Usually I ask questions, so very rarely do I get asked questions. So I thought it would be really cool. And also, in case, someone's checking this podcast out for the first time, they're going, How did this thing happen?" It's like, because it's like a way to replace a bad word. But what you talked about how being an activist is meant, it can be draining, right? Because there's so much energy being put into this. But again, going back to your passion, I've brought this up, and sometimes I feel like I'm cringing when I say this, but I think it's so true. I'm assuming you're not married, but I find that I find that your passion can be a lot like marriage, in the sense that you will have your great moments and you will also have bad moments. So for you, like, as someone who's a climate change activist, or especially when you're working with Learn Blue, what are some things you like about the work that you do, and what are some things that you don't like that I guess frustrate you, but you know you have to keep going in order to make everything work the way you want it to?
Yeah, you broke me, Hamza. No, I'm sorry to our listeners. It's probably going to be one of the most interesting episodes you're going to get. Not, I'm presuming you're not married. No, I am not married. I'm 22. Of course, I'm not married. But I mean, in a way, you're right. I am quite married to my work. I used to be. I think I got a divorce from my work a while ago. Because now I'm a lot more conscious of how I use my time and sort of my mental health. But I used to be married to LEARNBLUE, and it was very much, a mental dilemma. What are the things that I love and obviously things that I don't? I think that I'm just gonna start with the negatives, like things that I that I find very exhausting of from my work is not even as it relates to me personally or LEARNBLUE. It's just this underlying feeling that what you're doing is not enough. And I know it's so cliche, so it might even be cringe, but like, you know, as an activist, as a climate activist in Nigeria, there is a lot, and I mean a lot of factors that are literally just stacked up against you. Nigeria uses generators, like gasoline generators. Like I grew up in a place called Festa Town, where every night, every building or apartment block, like you have like 32 flats, and everybody like has their generators turned on every single night. And and in the town you have like, God knows, maybe 1,000 of those kind of buildings. You've got buses on the road that are not serviced properly, that are emitting insane amounts of dust. You've got people who have to cook with kerosene instead of gas. There's just like so many obstacles like that are stacked against you as a Nigerian activist for one. And so you begin to wonder that the work that you're doing, does it actually have any impact? There's only so much you can say, right? Which again is why I'm very sort of content that my work is generally around young people, Gen Zers. Because for me, I believe that if you're able to change people's mindset from like an early age, they sort of develop habits that when they become adults, they try not to repeat the same mistakes that their parents have made or their siblings have made and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the things that just frustrates me the most. It's like all of this time that I'm dedicating, all of this time that I should be spending being a regular teenager and going to parties, which I'm supposedly an ambivert, but like I don't even do. But I've been to like one party my entire life at this point. So like all of this time when I should be having fun and doing parties, and I spent that time sort of preaching the climate gospel or traveling and talking and speaking and doing podcasts and interviews. And it's very draining because all you think about again afterwards is another day, another sort of work has been done, but it's just sort of like falling on deaf ears sometimes, which sort of leads me to like the good parts, which is why it's very, very exciting for me when I see that these podcasts that I do, these webinars that I do, these conversations that I have, has an actual impact on somebody, and you literally see them change, and they, again, study on endeavors or adventures, or they just become more climate conscious, or they stop using plastic bottles, or all of this stuff. I think another thing too that's very frustrating and mentally draining is, as an activist, which is where your why comes in again. You, as an Nigerian activist, I think I should be very specific because I'm not sure my experiences are essentially shared around the world. But as a Nigerian or African activist, I have to deal with the fact that I am the odd one out. Everybody else is, regular, and they're cool, and they're young people, and then there is me. And so because I'm always like, oh my god, I have a habit of not, if I don't have a lot of alternatives to plastic in Nigeria. So when I do use plastic, I have a very bad habit. It's a good habit, but like in the Nigerian context, it's quite bad, where I hold that plastic waste, that sachet of water, that bottle drink, and just like hold it until I get home or until I see the nearest proper like waste bin. It's like a thing I just do subconsciously. And when you're walking around with friends like that, and your friends, as regular Nigerians that they are, for example, show their plastic bottles on the roadside, and you're that one person who gives them like the sub-bombastic side eye, like, it's just very draining to like always be in these circles where you're only the one who's trying to do the right thing, and every time everybody else is trying to do something wrong, and it's like you're the bad guy. And if care is not even taken, sometimes you get to lose your friends because they're like, I can't be around Joshua anymore. It's too holier than thou. But again, there's also the positive part of that where, because I'm the one who's always quote unquote doing the good thing, I have a reputation. And for me, one of the things that I appreciate the most about my work as an activist is my reputation. Before I became an activist, I used to be in tech, and I had a reputation in tech as a developer circle community lead thing with Meta. But when I got into climate activism, sort of that reputation just sort of spoke for itself, and it helped me access a lot of opportunities that I previously would not even be close to. So there is that sort of advantage because you're the guy that everybody knows is the one who is holier than thou. If an opportunity comes for an holier than thou person, they point to you. If there is an opportunity for the guy who doesn't show his death on the floor, it's you. So it's sort of like there's always a side of the coin. But over the last couple of years, I know in 2020, 2021, 2022, I had a severe sort of mental breakdown where LEARNBLUE just sort of like, we didn't shut down. If anything, we still sort of do work, but I just took a step back from publicizing what we are doing on social media and just sort of like did things very low key. That was just because of being put on a pedestal. I mentioned this earlier, because the work that we've done at LEARNBLUE has reached so many millions of people at our very early stage. Like our first major campaign literally went viral, if you will. So because of that, there is this pressure to live up to expectation. And so I had to, every single time I was thinking, what is the next big thing? And it becomes less of how I want to, the thing you want to do as a make impact, and more of like chase, like being a YouTuber and like chasing numbers and viewerships, right? So it's like, how can we reach the most people? How can we ensure that more people are learning? And so I had like a mental breakdown that just sort of had me take a step back from social media entirely from like 2020, 21, and just sort of like began to do things on a more low-key level. So it's a very tricky sort of question, but I think it's one that needed to be asked because most people don't see that. What they see is a perfectly curated brand or presence on social media. It's sort of like what we as activists want people to see. So it's only those who are really your friends, close friends, that get to like know that, oh my God, Joshua is having a mental breakdown. Because I come on Instagram, God knows I am gonna be like, oh my God, hi guys, like welcome back to my Instagram channel. I'm not gonna like, get into too personal with people online. So yeah, hopefully somebody listening to this understands that if they're going through, a lot of curry, they're not alone. It's sort of a normal experience to have.
For sure. I applaud you for being able to show what it's like to be you, because that's one of the things I really want to do, is not just focus on all the great things that a person does, but kind of just, what are the obstacles that they're going through that maybe people might not know too much of. And that's how I want to end that's how I want to ask, kind of how I want to ask the last question, which is, and maybe the answer is, again, maybe finding your why, but how do you know if you're doing the right thing? Because, and I'm sure you probably know this, because almost all guests I've interviewed, they'll say like their biggest enemy is themselves. And so I'm sure, like, for you, that's probably your enemy, right? Like the fact that there's always this version of you that's like bringing you down, even when you believe that you're trying to do something right. How do you try to, I guess, deal with the negative thoughts? Like, is there like a person that like is trying to is there like a Joshua inside of you that also tries to bring you up? Is there someone else that kind of guides you? Like, or is it really going back to finding your why? Like, how do you try to overcome negative thoughts, and, not just from externally, but also internally? Because like I said, we can always be our biggest enemy.
Yeah. Okay. Great question, Hamza. When are you having your show on like MSNBC? I'm gonna come on an interview. No, you're a good interviewer. I think that your why can only shield you from so much, and I think your why can only really shield you on the outside. Like, if something is wrong, you how do I explain it? Like if you're being bullied, for example, because you know why you started, it's gonna be very, very hard to like give up because you're getting bullied. But when the bully is you yourself, oh my God, it's the worst. I had a podcast with a friend, Zulu. She hosts a podcast called Career, and I talked about this sort of in depth because I don't know. I have a thing where I just like really, if I relate with you, I just like become very open, like an open book, and we just talk about like literally everything. But you know, my biggest, I talked about how my biggest enemy, if you will. I've never said my biggest enemies myself, but I think that's a good way to put it now that you mentioned the other guests have said so. I have a ton of imposter syndrome. Like you would not believe it. Like they were like, "Oh my god, I admire you." I'm like, "Oh, you do? That's so nice." Because I really don't admire myself. Like there is like a Joshua who's just there and is like, "Yeah, you really shouldn't apply for that thing because you're not gonna get it." Or there's a Joshua who is like, "If I do apply and I do like get rejected, it's like." I told you so. And so, there are a lot of opportunities that I tend to miss out on because I just cannot even take up my Mac and or my pen, if you will, proverbially, and start writing. But I think also like the how do I get out of that? It's not me. I not me the way I am. I don't think I have a Joshua who can pull Joshua out of, you know, depression, if you will. That's exaggerated, but like out of like my imposter syndrome state. What I do have is friends, like a very, very curated circle of friends. Like everything I do is very curated. It's like a probably a consequence of my OCD or ADHD or one of those two diagnoses. But I have everything is very much like if you're gonna be in my friend group, you have to meet X and Y criteria. And so when I'm in my bad moment Joshua phase, I know the right people or I have the right people that I can talk to who are just gonna be like, yeah, you know what, let's go out for a stroll and you'll be fine. And for the most part, I generally get fine. Or watch out, check out, this show on Netflix and that should solve your problems, like Con Connect, which did solve my problem recently. So, it's sort of having those kind of friends who just like understand you a lot and give you space if you need space and know when to like come back if you're needing a bit too much space that could make you mental. And I think also just understanding that this is something I always say, understanding that you're not alone, not in a deep way, like, oh my God, the universe is with you. I mean, you're not alone in the sense that it's a movement, especially with me as a climate activist. I am not alone. Like, I know a lot of climate activists around the world. So if I decide to take a break today for a month, a year, I know for a fact that there is somebody somewhere who's picking up the mantle and, being an activist, right? And that's just this level of reassurance that most people don't get. Just understanding and believing that, for every moment you're feeling down and you feel like you need a break, you should take that break and you shouldn't burn yourself out. Because I used to burn myself. I'm like, I've got to keep going. I can't stop now. Oh my God, they're counting on me. I'm like the hero. The world is waiting. No, the world isn't. Like there are people who can, help you save the world while you save yourself. Because like, if you're not in the right state of mind, whatever quote unquote impact you're trying to make becomes very meaningless. So those are sort of like my advice and thoughts on like how I get out of, I don't know, my negative Joshua states and what my negative Joshua states kind of look like, and the fact that that even exists at all is just acknowledging that whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling like you don't deserve. I'm such a storyteller, but when I got on Teen Vogue in 2021, I was like, why? When you question good things, it's like me, oh my God, why? Like what? Sorry, are you sure you're not mistaken? And it didn't even help because it was the inaugural class where Teen Vogue 21 and 21s for the most part had always been for women and femme and non-binary binary people. And so this was sort of the first year that it was open to like boys or male identifying persons. And I was one of like three people and the only person from Africa. And so for me, I was excited, but I was also more like, why? Like you shouldn't have taken me. And so it took a lot of friends like, oh my God, I'm so happy for you, and like a lot of congratulatory messages. I'm like, oh, okay, probably, I probably deserved it, I guess. But yeah, just back to summarizing, the answer is whatever you're going through, understand that if you take a break today, there's always going to be somebody there who's going to pick up the baton and have a great friend group that should generally like guide you and give you advice and be there for you.
For sure. And I'll leave it at this. I think everyone's journey is difficult with a lot of obstacles. As different as it can be, there's always going to be obstacles along the way, whether that's externally or internally. But just know that there are always going to be people who resonate with you and go like, look, I know you might have some things going on. I have some things going on. but we believe in the same thing. We believe in a place where climate change does not need to be an issue anymore. So let's find ways to try to overcome that issue and continue to raise awareness. Yes, it's going to be difficult, but let's do it together rather than separately. So I love the fact that you are someone that wants to continuously inspire people. The fact that, yes, there will be difficult moments, but it's so important to find people that can inspire to be better. And so I'm so glad to call you a friend. I'm so glad to be around people that want to inspire people rather than bring people down. So Joshua, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness. You gave so much amazing information that I feel like people can take away from, such as how you deal with negative emotions, what are some things that you don't like to do, but you have to do, and just being committed to your why. I think these are really important things, and I'm so glad to have met you and being able to talk about this, and I wish you nothing but the best for the future.
I'm so sorry too. I'm excited, by the way, to have this conversation. You're such a great interviewer and listener. But I'm so sorry I couldn't turn on my camera. I promise you, if I had, it would have been glorious and this would have been so much more fun. But just sort of watching your reaction and you bursting out and laugh. I don't even know how you do. You're like, it's like you're hosting a TV show. It's like you cannot laugh for more than 3 seconds at a time. So you laugh and you go off camera and then you come back and you're like, poker face. But yeah, no, this has been such a joy to talk to you. Let's hopefully in the future, when something has changed with me, I don't know, we can have another sort of episode where we just like have a catch up, or we can just have a regular call sometime soon. Thank you so much, Hamza, for being patient and having this conversation with me. Yeah, I don't know. If I'm ever in the US and I'm in Ohio, of all places, I will let you know, but that's very, very unlikely.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.